Yeah, I'm Christian Balafato. I've been a product manager for about 8 years. I've worked at probably 5 or 6 different companies now that range from seed stage companies, like 7 people in a room, up to, I worked at Microsoft for, I think if you add it all up, about 5.5 years. With Zillow now, I've been with Zillow now, actually, it's only been about 4 and change months. Tomorrow's actually launch day for the product that I've been working on for those 4 months, so it's been quite the journey. I'm gonna talk a little bit about some of the mistakes that I've made as a product manager, because I think it can shed a lot of light on what the discipline is like for those who are product managers or are new product managers. Hopefully it can help you avoid some of the mistakes that I've made. But really, I just think, talking about some of these issues can help people just understand what the role is really like on the ground. So I hope the content's helpful. So the first one here, I'm not crazy about the title. I said, not focusing enough on communication. I think it was in my 2nd year at Microsoft. Senior engineer comes into my office and sits down, and he's a really sweet guy, like very soft-spoken, very gentle. And he looks at me and he says, I feel like you don't respect me. I felt like I got kicked in the stomach that day. And you know what the sad part is? He was right. He was right. He and I didn't communicate using the same language. I'm sure you guys have had people you work with where you've got somebody who's kind of operates at a slightly higher kind of strategic level, and you've got people who are super analytical. I'm not painting stereotypes here, but we had a lot of difficulty communicating. And for me, it felt like a stubbornness. It felt like he was just not getting the ideas. I found myself getting frustrated. So when he walked into my office and said that to me, we had a really positive, like, heart-to-heart. The first thing I said is, I'm sorry, and genuinely, I didn't mean for that to come across. What I learned with him is, it wasn't at all that he wasn't getting it. It's that I wasn't communicating. The things that I was saying weren't resonating with him. And over the course of time, I found that instead of using words, I went to pictures. I would diagram. I would, find any means necessary to communicate with him. What I discovered through that is that he's an insanely talented engineer, actually. And our partnership wound up making us, frankly, one of the highest performing teams in that organization. We went ahead and we led a 2-year effort to revamp sharing on SharePoint. And he led most of the back-end infrastructure work that we had to do. So just, it's something that I found is taking the time to, having patience, giving people always kind of the benefit of the doubt, your teammates, and finding ways to communicate with them is something I've found critical throughout my career. So I forgot to mention a theme of the presentation here. Product management, it's interesting nowadays. I'm reading a lot of stuff that's like product management is a super technical discipline with, A/B testing and metrics, and it's like more of a quantitative field. At the end of the day, product management's about people. Like, it's about getting stuff done. You're moving stuff, trying to move the right stuff over the line at the end of the day. And so a disproportionate amount of what I'm going to talk about has to do with that soft stuff, because I found that's also the hardest stuff to get. You can put anybody, you can take somebody and put them in a room and teach them how to look at metrics, how to think about metrics. I mean, that's a lifetime of mastery, but you can start to get the fundamentals pretty quickly. The people stuff is just, it's a lifetime. It's a lifetime of learning, and I continue to make these mistakes. So the next one I'm going to talk about is stakeholder engagement, stakeholder management, some call it. Getting that right can be extraordinarily hard and also extraordinarily painful. With stakeholders, so I guess I'll tell you a little story, again, another little anecdote. I was in my first year at the company, a couple companies back, last one I was at in Denver. I had sat with the UX designer. We spent a bunch of time thinking about, how should we model properties? And it was a commercial real estate, technology company. How should we model properties? What should the layout look like? What are the pertinent data points, et cetera? So, we spent a bunch of time thinking about it. We put together, our pretty high fidelity wireframes. We sat down with the CEO and he just tore them apart. Why'd you do it that way? Why'd you do this? What's that for? That's not helpful. This should be over here. And I'm sitting there as the product manager, and I don't know if you guys have ever been in this situation. That is one of the most embarrassing and also, I mean, it's painful on so many levels. It's also one of the best ways to lose the trust of not only your stakeholder, but also your team, because it looks like you don't know what you're doing. So first of all, I mean, in that situation, you got to just own it. You got to step up and say, look, you're right. I should have gotten this in front of you. Or if you have compelling arguments, you should feel free to present them. I found that more often than not, when you're working with that kind of CEO visionary who founded a company, he's usually got pretty good ideas. So what I learned is, this actually paved the way for me to learn a ton about how to build trust and relationships with my stakeholders. And what I've found is, not only do they often have fantastic product intuition, they're also going to be your best coaches. So, and I'm gonna pause on my story for a minute here, because another thing that I've learned is that because product management is, you really do wear so many hats. I mean, you've got to know marketing in depth. You've got to know business strategy in depth. To some degree, you've got to know finance. You've got to know analytics and metrics. You've got to know UX design. You've got to have some engineering depth. You don't have to necessarily know how to code. It's very helpful, but you've got to know the fundamentals, right? And how do you learn these things? How do you learn all these things? You learn these things by working with people who are expert in that field. And what I've found is that oftentimes your stakeholders, your chief marketing officer, your chief executive officer, these folks have been doing what they do for a long time. And especially with a strong CEO or a strong general manager, they are going to teach you a ton about what matters. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. Yeah, come on in. We'll talk a little bit about that later, kind of in terms of other mistakes that I made downstream. One of the best ways to build trust with your stakeholders is to engage them early and to engage them often. Very specifically, a stakeholder, if you put yourself in their shoes, they need to know that you understand their constraints. They need to know that you understand the constraints of the business. They need to know that whether it's legal or compliance, or if it's strategic, or if it's political and related to the industry that you're in, you're not going to know those things. And that's why engaging them early, engaging them often is critical. In this, go back, back to the story. What I found worked with him, he was, kind of your quintessential difficult stakeholder, who, I hate that term now. It's just a highly invested stakeholder with very strong opinions, So what I started doing is I actually started pulling him into the mini design sprints that we'd do. We'd sit down and we'd sketch with the CEO in the room. I wanted to get his ideas, get his eyes on product ideas early. And that I found is your number one way to build the trust and build the relationships. And also avoid that situation I mentioned. So this is another one, actually. This is something that I still have to guard against to this day. It's interesting. I found that culturally, we kind of really admire the maverick. So what I mean, publicly breaking rank. What I mean is, I'll give you a story. I've got stories for all of these, stories for days. I was working on it was a UX architecture overhaul, like a kind of an interaction architecture overhaul. One of the products that I was working on pretty recently. We had what we thought was the ideal design in mind. All right, and I had stakeholders who were, again, very, very engaged. It was a strategic part of the product, high visibility, and we kept coming to the plate with what we thought was the right UX architecture, and it kept getting shot down. So fast forward a little while, we made some concessions, what I saw at the time as concessions. And we put that into development. And I remember one of the engineers asking me while they were working on that, they said, why are we doing this? This is not the right design. The right design is this. And at that time, I was frustrated. I also didn't have a good answer for him, we'll talk about that as a separate story. But what I said to him is, don't worry, we're fighting the good fight. That was the wrong answer. That was the wrong answer. The reason that was the wrong answer is that, first of all, it creates an us versus them. Well, first of all, I am publicly owning that we are building the wrong thing. that I have just said, yeah, we're going to build this. You guys just spent time building this. It's not the optimal solution. Now, what does that say about me, right? Who am I? What am I doing as a product manager giving them work that's not the right thing? The second thing it does is it creates an us versus them kind of, it sows dissension in the ranks. It's not good for morale. Now, the right approach here is, how many of you guys have heard of Jocko Willink? He wrote a book called Extreme Ownership. If you guys haven't read it, I highly recommend it. You read it? Yeah, I personally really appreciate that book. In fact, little sidebar, I'm going to plug Spencer Raskoff's podcast, Office Hours. It's a podcast with a bunch of leaders across different industries, different sectors. I've found that some of the most interesting podcasts are actually with leaders in the public sector, outside of the private. Just to see the overlap in the stories. But back to, so Jocko was a Navy SEAL. He was an officer for quite a few years. One of the chapters in the book is called Believe, and it's about understanding the mission. Now, this isn't exactly about the mission, what I'm talking about here, but my job was to understand what were the concerns that were beneath their resistance to the design that we thought was optimal. That was the first and most important thing, because I needed to understand that so that I could, if I had a good story for why this was still optimal, I could tell the story for how this solved for their concerns. More importantly, I should have been messaging that to the team. I should have been coming back to them and saying, yeah, but we have concerns about how this is going to work with this other thing that we have coming into the UI about 6, 12 months from now. We need to solve for that. Even though we don't know about that, this is optimal for now. This other design is optimal for 12 months from now. So understanding that, but the takeaway here again is it's hard to do sometimes, but it's really important for the team, for yourself, to resist that urge to say, it's just them. They just don't know what they're talking about. Understand what they're talking about. This is another one that I learned probably in my first year or two at Microsoft. It's admitting you are wrong, don't know, need help, and screwed up. I'll give you a story from today. I'm on the bus and I get a Slack message. Hey, so yesterday we had to unfortunately roll back a change that we made. And I get, my product cuts across kind of everybody's product. I can tell you a little about it now, it's fairly public. Zillow's doing some work up in Canada. We're bringing Canadian listings to Zillow.com. So my work cuts across the whole stack, which means my engineers or the engineers we're working with have to go in and get into other people's code bases, right? So there's a history of people getting into this one specific team's code base. Mistakes have been made, rollbacks, you name it, right? So I get a Slack this morning about the rollback, and it says, basically, the one guy that I told you to make sure was a code reviewer was not a code reviewer on this. So of course, I'm like, I found that in those situations, 100% of the time, the best way to diffuse that is not to get defensive. It's just to say, and in this case, he very much was, you are right. 100% right, I own it. I screwed up. I said, and then, it was interesting because, my manager was like, well, we should have, make sure we have some test coverage. And I jumped in and I said, no. I missed. This is my miss. I should have had him as a code reviewer. You're right. I'm sorry. It won't happen again. Period. It's easy to feel like those words make you look weak, make you look wrong. But I've actually found that's the back door to building a ton of trust and respect, is to fess up. Own it. That's actually one of the Zillow values, is own it. We're super big on values. I know Amazon is as well. So yeah, we got very similar ones too. But step up, own it, and move forward. With caveats, I found the same thing is true about I don't know. It's knowing when to say that. If you don't have a good answer, if you aren't sure, the best answer is I don't know, but I'll go find out. Again, it's just, people can't trust you if they don't trust that you know your own limitations. And once again, that's just one of those things that I don't think we appreciate enough. My lead at Microsoft actually taught me this. I came into Microsoft, and to this day, I'm still a perfectionist. It's hard for me to fess up when I make mistakes. she looked at me one day. She gave me this project I absolutely couldn't handle. And at the end of that, I got through it. It was really painful. I got through it. She said, I set out to break you. Like literally verbatim sat me down and said, I set out to break you. You came in and I saw you got a ton of talent. You're a perfectionist. We can't have that. You're not going to succeed. She said, I put you into a situation I knew you couldn't handle, and I made you ask for help. And it was, I tell that story all the time because it was one of the greatest gifts I've been given. It really was. So overwhelming the team, I think a lot of product managers are probably, or people who are interested in the field are probably prone to this. When you see a problem, you got to fix it. It's like, you know, for me, I always want, I have a tendency to boil the ocean. I have a tendency to try to fix everything at once. If there's a problem, I'm going to fix it. I'm not going to let things go. That doesn't always work so well for an engineering team. So I found that, you know, one of the bits of feedback that I got from my VP at a past company was, it was actually on my way out. We still have a good relationship. You know, I was moving up to Seattle, and but he said to me, "If there's one thing that I want you to walk away with, give the team one thing at a time. Give the team one thing at a time." And that for me is true. It's true in kind of, I think of it in two ways. One is it's like the one metric that matters. It's the clarity in the mission. It's, you know, what are we focused on at this moment strategically? What is the one thing that matters for us? What's our one target? But also when you're thinking about like process improvement, you know, I found that in my role, a lot of the time I run agile process or I'm very close to it. And also as a product manager, at the end of the day, my accountability is to get successful product out the door. Therefore, I have a vested interest in having a high functioning team, right? So process improvement is just part of the gig. When I think about process improvement now, it's one thing at a time. We do a retro, we have a whole bunch of ideas up there, and I say, okay guys, what's the one thing we're gonna pick, commit to, and change, move the needle on over the next 2 weeks. So that definitely a tendency. I'm still vigilant about that, but you know, getting better. Optimizing locally. So now kind of shifting into a little bit more of the kind of strategic product management role. This one's an interesting one because it depends on the company you're at. You know, how much say you have in strategically the direction you're taking the team. That varies company to company. When you're in your first role and you really have that responsibility, you know what? I'm actually going to take all that back. No matter where you are, it's your job to speak up if you think you're doing the wrong thing. It's very easy though to get caught up in your day-to-day. So back to the commercial real estate company. My team launched our first mobile app. And so this is the first time I put a new product into the world, like a full product into the world. It was just me. We had, you know, this idea that like, it's going to be great. People are going to love it. Brokers are always in the field. Why wouldn't they love mobile? It's going to be, you know, competition killer. We launched the product. Of course, what happens? Nobody comes. Nobody comes. We get a couple people trickling in. I mean, we did a soft launch. We did a beta test. We had people come, you know. We got a little bit of traction, but we did not see nearly the engagement we expected. And me, I'm thinking, well, we're just doing something wrong. Like I got to find the right features, or I got to find the right, you know. It took me about 3, 4, 5 months too long to realize that no, we built the wrong product. That's the truth. People didn't need mobile. They were very happy with the desktop solution. What we built, you guys heard the term vitamin versus painkiller? Yeah, no, some shakes of the head. So vitamin's something you should take, but you don't need. Painkiller's something you need. When you're talking about building product, you really want to be building painkillers. You don't want to be trying to sell a vitamin, right? We built a vitamin with Apto. It was a company was Apto, product was Apto Mobile. We built a vitamin, and we should have been focusing on, you know, a rich new, you know, sleek and sexy CRM for these guys on a brand new stack. It took me way too long because I was just focused on that local optimization problem, right? That experience for me has fundamentally changed the way that I view my role. Pretty much every day I'm asking myself, are we building the right thing, right? Are we building the thing that's going to move the needle on whatever our strategic objective is at the moment? And when you start thinking that way, you start thinking like a CEO, you start thinking about what really is our objective right now? Is it monetization? Is it engagement? Is it, traffic and growth? It opens up a whole new world of thinking about product management and product. I found that perspective, and that's something that's going to take time. And I think my last slide, we'll talk a little bit about that, but it takes time to cultivate that perspective. But when and again, it comes in part by working closely with your stakeholders, because those are the people that think at that level. They have to, it's their job, right? They help you up level the way that you think. And when you do start to think that way, it's beautiful for simplifying. It gives you a clarity of purpose and a sense of ownership and accountability that it's just unmatched. It's what makes, personally, I think, it's what makes this feel beautiful. And my last slide for tonight is, the other mistake I make is always rushing the journey. Like, product management is way more, and it's a craft. I mean, it's a craft. And you can study, and it's important, study the fundamentals, learn the fundamentals, and then get out in the world and do it. It's going to take time to really deepen all these skills. Personally, I'm like a voracious, again, boiling the ocean, overwhelming the team. I'll read everything. I'm jumping from book to book to book to book to book. How quickly can I move through, and how fast can I acquire these skills? It's all helpful, and it all kind of, it sits in the back of your brain, but it's not until you start flexing those muscles, things really start to come together. So that's all I have for you guys tonight.